Eric is Netflix's latest show to be released, and it's safe to say that it was definitely an interesting watch, focusing on Vincent's toxic lifestyle, which made him lose touch of what was important to him, and also the disappearance of his son Edgar. This show tackled not only personal demons, but demons that plagued New York City during the 80s. Whilst this isn't based on a true story, it's a show that does feel very real because it's closely linked to a lot of what was happening throughout that time period. So with that, let's get into the video and break down all that there was to take away from the show. Here is Eric ending explained. Just to let you know, this video will contain spoilers. The ending. With regards to the ending of the show, there were multiple different endings that needed wrapping up. So let's start with Edgar, Vincent, and Cassie. At the end of the final episode, we saw Vincent's plan of wanting to find his son by using the monster that he drew called Eric come to fruition, even though there was a point partway through where he questioned if that was even going to be possible. Whilst on stage, he said the line, "Everybody thinks of changing the world, but nobody thinks of changing themselves." This was probably one of the most important lines in the entirety of the show. This was Vincent finally acknowledging the fact that he himself was to blame for everything that was falling apart in his life, and also understanding that he didn't create an environment for his son in which he wanted to live in. Vincent blamed his father, he blamed the execs at the company he worked at, and he blamed Cassie for everything that was going wrong. But never did he look inwards and realize that the monster that was in front of him within his own mind was a reflection of himself. Like he also said as well, some monsters don't hide under the bed, they follow you in plain sight. And this was him accepting that and being ready to move on. This was also what his son Edgar wanted to hear. Edgar saw the monster that he drew on paper become a real thing, and he saw that his father wasn't the person that he originally was when he ran away from home, and that was enough to make him less scared of him and want to go back. During this time as well, we saw Vincent take the next step and be prepared to go to rehab and sort his life out for good this time. Throughout the entirety of the show, he was pushing his inner thoughts and demons to the bottom of his mind and not being prepared to get help from Dr. Mason, but now he was finally ready to. With Edgar and Vincent's story as well, in the closing part of the series, it cut to a few months later where we saw that Vincent met his father in a park, and we saw that it was the very park which inspired him to create the show Good Morning Sunshine. Plus, his father also used to say that phrase to him when they'd go out together, which is where the title of his show came from too. This showed that at one point in his life, he deeply admired his father. But with the lack of care that was present there, the creation of the show and setting it in an environment which his father knew of could have been Vincent's way of crying out for attention and approval. However, this closing section was more about Vincent saying goodbye to his father, realizing that he wasn't a good man, and acknowledging that he didn't need to fight for the attention or approval anymore, because he himself was accepting of who he now was as a person. Right at the end of the series, we saw that Edgar went to watch his father in the show with his mother, and also Sebastian, and it marked a full circle moment. Every relationship that Vincent had at the start of the series was destructive and dangerous. But we saw in this final scene, Vincent was pleasant with Cassie, and the relationship with his son was in a state where they were getting closer. Edgar was wearing the Eric costume as well, which was almost symbolic of the fact that the only reason that Eric existed was because of Edgar's mind. The final shot that we had in the show was of the imaginary version of Eric looking on from a distance as Vincent and his son bonded together. The monster looked relaxed and content, and I think that was a representation of how Vincent's mind was when we left the show, something which was far different from where it started. With regards to the rest of the stories in the show, we saw that the case of Marlon Rochelle was solved. It turned out that he was actually at the Lux on the night in question, and the codename of 8, which we heard in the first episode, was a nickname to refer to Marlon. This was because of the number of the jersey that he was wearing. It turned out that it was Kennedy and Noakes that were there on the night that Marlon was killed, and Noakes was the main person that was responsible for beating him to death. He beat him to death after he was taken outside by Deputy Mayor Costello, and he wanted him to commit acts on him. The reason Kennedy was taken out by Noakes was because he was getting paranoid about what happened, and there was a risk that he was going to blurt out their involvement in Marlon's death. That's why Noakes had the dent on his car, because he was responsible for the death of his co-worker. With Detective Latroit becoming more accepting of the person that he was and feeling as though he had a responsibility, after getting closer with Gator, somebody who he had a history with, he saw the tape and then shared it with the rest of the force, something which he was fearful of doing because it was obviously a highly corrupt place. But from there, the criminal ring was exposed and everybody involved in Marlon's death was arrested. Costello and Dabari were both arrested as Dabari was giving the orders. Mr. Lakatos was taken in because he was involved in disposing of the body. Mika was arrested and he was actually the person that talked. Noakes was also arrested too. His future didn't actually look that bright as the prisoners were all saying that he was going to be a dead man. So justice was finally served for the case that was placed on the back burner and wasn't given the attention that it deserved due to the racism and homophobia that was present at the time. It turned out that Lenny was actually also involved in this criminal ring, and with it being announced that a creator of a TV show was involved on the news, he didn't want to go to jail, so he ended up leaping out of his window and ending things. With regards to Detroit, he had to move out of the apartment that he spent the previous 7 years in with William due to William's sister not valuing their relationship, and from there, several months later, we saw that he was visiting Marlon's mother's house and arrived with groceries. He accepted who he was in front of everybody and was prepared to adopt that confidence in moving forward. He learned from William, Gator, Marlon's mother, and the wrongdoings from those around him, and I feel we also left him in a much better position compared to when the show started. My review of Eric. I think this was a pretty good show. There were many things that I liked about it, but I would say that at the same time there were a few things that I thought let it down. One of those was the cliche ending where Edgar was in the diner and he saw his father talking on the TV and then they raced back home. It was nice, don't get me wrong, but it kind of had that feeling that you're getting Christmas movies. The tone of the show was so dark up until that point that it just felt a little too light compared to the darkness that was present on every avenue. Whether that be the racism, corruption, homophobia, the homeless people not being seen as human beings, and also people going missing. So that one scene in particular just didn't quite match it for me, and considering it was all about finding Edgar and bringing him home, I just wish it was done a bit differently. In terms of the way that the story was structured though, I thought it was told to us in a really digestible way. Having all of the different stories running alongside each other and then coming together in the end was something which I thought was a nice way of delivering it. It was almost like it took Edgar to go missing and to go underground for the corruption and evil nature that was present amongst all areas of the city to rise to the surface, and for justice to finally be served for the disappearance and eventual discovery of the murder of Marlon. The way that this TV series looked was just gorgeous. It seemed like it was shot on film, and the grain that was present when watching it really suited the time period that it was going for. It felt very 80s in not only the set, outfits, and environment, but also from a stylistic perspective in it being shot on film and also the earthy grading that it had and the color palette in general. At first, when I saw Eric the Monster, I was concerned how it would be, considering this seemed like it was going to be a very serious dark drama, and then there was just this colorful monster that would be popping up. But I think it worked quite well and didn't feel too much or too over the top to the point where it jeopardized the tone. I actually thought it worked well in allowing us to see Vincent's inner monologue and understanding what was going on inside of his mind at that point. It was almost like Eric had always been buried within him, but the actual visual representation of him meant that it went more front of mind for the character and allowed him to have that change. When it came to the performances of the characters by the cast, I thought most of them were pretty good to be fair. Benedict Cumberbatch was good as per usual, and I thought the characters of Cassie and Detective Detroit were also performed really well too. I was surprised to see David Denman in this, and I didn't actually realize it was him until about halfway through the show. I only really know him from The Office, so seeing him in this was quite a surprise, but I thought he did a great job with the character. I personally think I would have preferred it if the show leaned even more into the darker tone that it was going for. It was very dark, but I think certain things such as Edgar surviving and us not really knowing how, and the run at the end where they met at the house, it just felt slightly different. It's like all of the stories outside of Edgar going missing were so dark and hard to watch at points. But when it came to Edgar, it never really felt like he was in any true danger. It seemed like a happy ending was always in sight, so if the predictability of a happy ending wasn't there, then maybe it would have made it a better watch. So when it comes to recommending this show, I do think it's definitely worth a watch. It's only 6 episodes, but they're nearly an hour long, so it does feel quite long for a show that only has 6 installments. However, I don't think that goes against it at all. It's got a good story at its core. For the first half of the show, you're guessing and wondering what happened to Edgar. Plus, the side stories keep you hooked and engaged too. I think this show's definitely worth a watch, and it's one that you can easily get through on a weekend. I don't think you'll be disappointed. So, there you have it. Eric ending explained. What did you think of this show? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. As always, thanks for tuning into the video, and I'll see you in the next one.